Okay, so today what we're going to be looking at is still the Atlantic slave trade in terms of defending the trade. Why did it take so long to abolish the slave trade? Now, your aims by the end of this lesson are firstly just to describe why did it take so long to abolish the slave trade, what were the reasons for that. Your second aim for today is to be able to explain the reasons why the slave trade does eventually end, what factors contribute to the slave trade ending. Now, just a wee recap from what we covered last lesson. The Slave Trade Regulation Act of 1788. Now if you remember, this act put a limit on the number of slaves that could be carried on British ships. Now that picture on the right hand side there that you'll see, again if you think back to when we looked at conditions on the Middle Passage, that was the typical layout of a slave ship and how slaves would be packed into the ship. Now this act in 1788 said that each man was allowed to have a space of 6 foot 1 inch in length and 1 foot 4 inch in width. Now 1 foot 4 inch in width is only 1 inch shorter than the width of a piece of A3 paper, so they're still very tightly packed in. Now you'll see before this act was put in place, the slave ship Brooks carried 609 slaves. Afterwards it was only allowed to carry 454 slaves. So there had been attempts to improve conditions on slave ships. However, this act did not go anywhere near abolishing the slave trade or ending it in any way. Now, our first aim, as I said today, was to describe why it took so long to abolish the slave trade. Now, what you can do is take a new page in your jotter and draw a clock face in the middle of your page, just like the one on the right hand side. On the hands, you're going to write, why did it take so long to end the slave trade? And around the clock face, you're going to write down different reasons that were used to defend the slave trade. So why do people argue against ending the slave trade? Why do they want it to continue? Now if you pause the video just now, that will give you a few minutes to draw this clock face. Make sure you take a whole page so you leave yourself plenty of room. Now, why did it take so long to abolish the slave trade? Britain got lots of luxury goods from the trade. Now if you remember, some of the goods that Britain were getting from the slave trade, sugar, which obviously we still use today, was used at that time for tea and for flavouring food. Obviously we use sugar today for tea, coffee and making chocolate in particular. Tobacco, remember again if you think back to Glasgow and the tobacco laws, tobacco was a big commodity at this time. It was very popular amongst people. Rice, coffee, rum and cotton, all still goods that we use today in our lives, and at this time they were very important to people. They were luxury goods for people at this time, so having access to them was a privilege for some people, and that was a reason why a lot of people wanted the slave trade to continue, because it gave them access to these luxury goods, and people were worried if the slave trade ended that they wouldn't get the access to these goods. Another reason that the slave trade took so long to end was simply because it made Britain a lot of money. You've got to remember as well that a lot of jobs relied on the slave trade in Britain, and thousands of people in Britain had jobs that were involved in the slave trade, particularly through the triangular trade. People in towns and cities across Britain benefited from the slave trade, including places like Bristol and Liverpool. You think in Liverpool, for example, that was a massive city for building slave ships. So people relied on the slave trade happening, still being in place for their jobs and their livelihood. A lot of people at this time in Britain wouldn't have thought about the terrible conditions that slaves are facing or how morally wrong people thought it was. They just saw it as, oh well, we have a job, it's supporting our income, our livelihood, so we want it to continue. The French Revolution, now this is a factor that a lot of people don't actually think about in terms of why the slave trade took so long to end. Now the French Revolution, just a quick background here for you, in 1789 the French people overthrew their King Louis. Now they executed him via the guillotine, and you'll see that picture on the right hand side there, in 1793. So he had ruled France for a long time, the royal family. Ultimately the people in France weren't happy with him, so he was overthrown and killed. Now after this, Britain and other countries declared war on France, and these wars lasted until 1815. When Napoleon Bonaparte, if you look, there's Napoleon there on the left hand side as well, the French leader, he was defeated at Waterloo in Belgium. Now you're still probably thinking, well that's the French Revolution, what has that got to do with the slave trade? Well you'll see there at the bottom where it says Britain declared war on France. Now that is the important point here. Britain needed money to fight France. Now, ending the trade, the argument was that this would cost the country money. So they needed the slave trade, the money that they were bringing in via taxes. They needed the slave trade to make Britain money to continue to fight against France. Britain also needed ships and sailors to protect her trade as well, and herself from invasion, because remember, Britain is an island. It was claimed that the slave trade was a training ground for the navy as well, so that was a very, very important point. So as well as fighting against France, the fact that Britain needed to defend itself in general, it's an island, it needs a strong navy, the slave trade was seen as the perfect training ground for that. Haiti also links to why it took so long to abolish the slave trade. Now, in Haiti, the slaves had followed the example of their French masters, and they took part in a revolution to try and end slavery. Now, British slaves on the islands in the West Indies might revolt if the slave trade was ended, thinking they were ultimately free. Now, Toussaint Louverture, the Haitian slave leader, had shown that slaves could defeat European armies. He has successfully led a slave rebellion and ultimately turned Haiti into the first independent state that was ultimately run by former slaves. Now, the feeling was again that this endangered British lives and property in the West Indies. If slaves in the West Indies heard about what was happening in Haiti and what had happened in Haiti, they might feel that they should then push for their cause in terms of ending the slave trade as well. So that was a big, big factor as well. So that was some of the reasons why it took so long to abolish the slave trade. So make sure that you have them down around your clock if you want to pause again, and then we're going to move on now to look at why the slave trade was eventually ended. But that was the reasons there in terms of why it took so long to end the slave trade, the arguments for the trade itself. Now, abolition at last. Now remember, abolition, the end, the abolishment of the slave trade. So abolition comes at last. Now that man there on your PowerPoint is again William Wilberforce, depicted in a movie. Now, on the 10th of June 1806, Parliament agreed that no British person could take part in the slave trade. So the slave trade ultimately ended in Britain. People could no longer buy and sell slaves, but those who owned slaves could keep the ones they had. So although it said that ultimately no British person could be involved in the slave trade and it was meant to have ended, you could still keep the slaves that you had. Now, the bill eventually becomes law in May 1807. Just like today, when Parliament passes a bill, this doesn't necessarily come into force straight away. It takes a bit of time to go through as well. So this bill became law in May 1807. Now, initially, if you were caught breaking the law, you'd be fined £100. After 1811, anyone found flouting the law would be sentenced to transportation and sent to Australia for life. Australia was part of the British Empire at this time. Australia was a popular destination to send convicts, to send criminals, and if you were caught breaking this law in terms of being involved in the slave trade, you could be sent to Australia. Now, the end of the slave trade eventually, as I said, our second aim today was just to describe the reasons that the slave trade actually ends. Now, there's a lot of debate amongst historians over which factors were the most important in bringing about the end of the transatlantic slave trade. It's important for you to remember that there's not one individual factor that ends the slave trade. It is a combination of factors, and it is your personal opinion in terms of what reason or reasons you think were most important. Now, some of the factors in terms of why the slave trade does end include economic reasons, religious reasons, public opinion changing, and parliamentary debate and the role of politicians. Now, why was the slave trade finally abolished? One major reason was due to religion. There was what's known as a religious revival. So people thought that slavery wasn't very Christian. The "Am I not a man and a brother" slogan of the Abolition Society on the Wedgwood seal struck a chord with the masses. So people started to think the Bible doesn't actually say that slavery is the right thing to do. Slavery is not the right thing to do if we are going to be true Christians. And obviously the slogan there on the seal made by Joshua Wedgwood, that struck a chord with a lot of people. That was very, very clear in terms of, am I not a man and a brother? It was simple, it was straightforward, and that made people think as well, how can we honestly say that we are true Christians if we are treating people like this? We need to treat people equally, which is what the Bible is telling us to do as well. So let's push forward to make sure we end the slave trade. Economically, although we discussed in terms of arguments for the slave trade that it was making people and Britain a lot of money, economically, the slave trade had helped Britain. New industries like textiles, like ironworks had developed. They had brought a lot of wealth through exports to Britain. However, Britain could now get luxury goods through free labour in places like India at a lower cost. So ultimately, Britain didn't actually need the slave trade anymore. It could survive on its own without the slave trade. It could get goods from places like India because India was part of the British Empire as well. Now, historian Eric Williams showed that the slave trade hadn't been making as much money in the years shortly before abolition. Now, he argued that was a key reason for it being abolished. Ultimately, if it's not making as much money, then Britain can survive without it. And a key argument had been, it's making us a lot of money, we need to continue this. However, as recent research has shown, it wasn't making Britain as much money, and so the slave trade was eventually abolished. Also, the French Revolution, although as we discussed as well, the link to that in terms of Britain's wars, that meant that Britain needed the slave trade to make money to fight against France. Slavery to a lot of people seemed wrong after the French Revolution, because people had spoken of freedom, they had risen up, they had fought for their freedom, and to a lot of people it seemed like slavery isn't really the right thing anymore. We need to be giving people more freedom. William Wilberforce, and you may have seen this video in class as well, William Wilberforce's tactics of taking people on board slave ships without telling them what the ship was actually used for, the fact that it was a slave ship, until they were on board, was very, very successful. He would go on the ship and he would speak to people and he would say, smell around you, what do you smell? Look at these shackles that have been used. This ship here was a slave ship. This ship transported this amount of people from Africa to the West Indies. This is how many people died on board this ship. He was able to give those sort of facts, and that really hit home for a lot of people as well. As we've discussed as well, William Wilberforce, his leadership and persistence convinced many that slavery was wrong. Had it not been for Wilberforce continuing to campaign against the slave trade, arguably it would have lasted for a lot longer. Wilberforce was the driving force behind ending the slave trade. His continuing campaigning really did make people think about slavery, make people think about the slave trade, and ultimately helped it to be abolished. Now, public opinion is also massive around the slave trade. It was clear that due to the work carried out by the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade, that the opinion of the British public was changing. Beforehand, it had heavily supported the slave trade, or maybe not thought that much about the slave trade. When the abolition had been campaigning, spreading their message through their different methods, the public opinion did start to change. This meant, through the abolitionist methods, that there was a better understanding of the slave trade, and ultimately the conditions that slaves had to endure. That turned people against the slave trade. When Wilberforce was able to say to people, for example, on the ship, this is how many people died, this is the sort of conditions that they were transported in, that shocked a lot of people. Petitions as well were very, very important. Petitions were sent to Parliament now. Petitions are effectively a piece of paper that you would sign arguing for something to happen. So in this case, petitions were put forward gaining support to end the slave trade. Also, there was petitions to Parliament and a campaign to boycott sugar. So the boycott of West Indian sugar, that attracted hundreds of thousands of supporters. People started to say, let's stop using West Indian sugar because we don't agree with the slave trade. And obviously West Indian sugar was a product of the slave trade. Also, the parliamentary debate and the role of politicians, as we've just mentioned, Wilberforce being very, very important. But the abolitionist movement was not a one-man band. Now, although much of the credit must go to William Wilberforce, he was, yes, the driving force, but he was helped by so many other abolitionists as well. Now, Wilberforce himself, he made the abolition of slavery an issue for debate in Parliament. Now, he was a great, great speaker, and his ability as a speaker persuaded many other people that the slave trade had to end. Historians have also shown the importance of James Stephen's Bill of 1806. Now, in effect, Parliament only abolished the slave trade when it had virtually collapsed anyway as well. So people argue, yes, Wilberforce was important, yes, James Stephen's Bill was important, but Parliament only actually abolished the slave trade when it was basically about to collapse anyway, is another argument. So were many politicians passionate about ending it, or did they ultimately accept that it's coming to an end? So let's just draw a line under it now. That again is a debate. Now, your next activity. If you write the heading, why was the slave trade finally abolished? Again, you should probably take a new page for this because most of your page will have been taken up for your clock. Now you have questions here. So question A, why did the religious revival encourage people to condemn the slave trade? That's supposed to be question B, sorry. Question B, why did Britain no longer need the slave trade? Give 2 reasons. And then that would be question C, why did the French Revolution make people think slavery was wrong? And then question D, explain the role William Wilberforce played in helping to end the slave trade. Now I apologise that it says A, B, C, if you just say A, B, C, D. Now all your answers to these questions will be found in the previous slides, so you can look back on those slides to help you to answer them. Make sure you answer in full sentences, referring back to the question. If you want to pause the PowerPoint at this point as well, and then you can look back at the questions and answer them. Okay, so we should now be able to describe the reasons that people wanted the slave trade to continue, the arguments for the slave trade, and we should also be able to describe the reasons why the slave trade ended. Okay, why were people against it? Now, just to summarise what you have learned today, in your jotter again, if you draw a table like the one below, so make sure you put the full headings for each of the columns, so you've got arguments for the slave trade and arguments against the slave trade. Now, using what you've learned, the sources, there's a source on the next page as well. Complete the table with as many arguments for and against the slave trade as you can. Now, try and put the arguments into your own words. If you can, try and not look back through all the slides of the PowerPoint. Try and do this from your own knowledge, from what you've learned. As much detail as you can and in your own words. Why did people support the slave trade? What was the arguments for the slave trade? And why are people against the slave trade? Now again, if you want to pause the PowerPoint at this point, you can, and that will allow you to fill in this table in your jotter. Okay, and lastly, you have this source here. Now this source will help you with filling out the previous table on the previous slide. This source here is an evaluate the usefulness question. So your question says, evaluate the usefulness of source B as evidence about the anti-abolitionist campaign. Now it says source B is from a petition to Parliament by Liverpool Corporation 1788, and you have your source there. So once you've completed all other activities, this is a bit of source work for you. If you read over the source itself, remember how to answer this question. You're aiming to use COWPAT. So remember COWPAT, C standing for content, O standing for omission, W for when, P for purpose, A for author, and T for type. Now remember, this question is worth 5 marks. So you would take 2 pieces of content, 2 points from the source, in terms of evidence for the anti-abolitionist campaign. Remember to say the source is useful as it accurately states. Have your quote, full stop. This makes the source useful as it is accurate, and you're doing that twice. For your omission, what the source doesn't tell you, remember you're saying the source is less useful as it fails to tell us, and you're doing 2 points there. For when, you're identifying the date and why that makes it useful. And if you choose to do purpose, author or type, for purpose, you're trying to identify why the source was written and why that makes it useful. For author, who wrote the source and why is that useful? And for type, what type of source is it and why does that make it useful?